Welcome to The Overlap, a conversation at the intersection between art and science. Visual science communication is a powerful tool that plays a vital role in conveying scientific information to all. The Guild of Natural Science Illustrators, or GNSI, is proud to offer this opportunity to join in the conversation, where you learn about curious ideas, creative works, interesting phenomenon, and the field of natural science illustration with your host, Mark Kesling, which is me. Today's conversation features award-winning nature artist and educator, author, and interpretive specialist Linda Feltner. Linda combines her expertise in painting and drawing and teaching with her passion as a natural science interpreter. In her book, Drawing Nature, the creative process of an artist, illustrator, and naturalist, which I hope you'll, at the end, I'll give you some ways to get that book if you haven't already gotten it. She provides a spark that awakens curiosity, invites questions, and promotes an appreciation of the complexity of nature. Joining us from her home in Sky Islands in southeastern Arizona is Linda Feltner. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Linda, I want to get us started by just, was there anything that I missed that you wanted people to know about you when I introduced you?
Well, I've been a member of the Guild since the early 90s, and I was very proud to be on the board and served as president of 2016 to 2018. So I've been teaching workshops at the Guild conferences since 2009, and the Guild to me is like a family in a way, and I've missed everyone for these years, and really glad that we'll have a conference live in person next summer. I look forward to it.
That's wonderful. Linda, I'm going to turn this over to you. If you want to go ahead and share your screen, and I'll mute myself for a little bit. And if everybody else would mute themselves, that helps as well. Thank you so much.
Okay. Okay, can you see it?
Yes.
Oh, yay. Okay.
Good to go.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. And thank all of you for joining me. It's wonderful to see everyone's faces and where you're from. The book is about my process. It's, I'm gonna, whoops, where's my thingy? Here we go. I'm gonna slide this over a little bit. Thank you, so I can see it better. It's my process from spark to finish. And for me, it celebrates curiosity and being a nature illustrator, an artist, and naturalist, and I teach bird drawing and live animal bird drawing workshops. The curiosity that is sparked by nature just feeds my inner being. I'm a curious wanderer in nature, and I mosey along the trails. I'm not a hiker. So anything may catch my eye and lead to a story. My career for 35 years, I was an independent contractor as an interpreter, an educational environmental interpreter for natural history and cultural history. And I was a contractor with the Park Service, the National Park Service, the BLM Forest Service, and many municipal governments, conservation agencies. So the range of my drawing, from combining a fine art background into scientific illustration, was so very exciting. It was my niche because I learned about so much of nature depending on which project that I was bid on it and it got the bid for. And so, I mean, it ranged all over the US and in Canada, and well, some in Canada, but all over the US. And I was based in Washington State in Seattle for a while, and then we moved to southeastern Arizona, where I continued. So this book it's a journey of my process, that some of the drawings go back about 45 years when I began sketching and drawing, and my interest in nature began to develop, and I began to use it in interpretation. And everywhere I walk in nature, I can find something that catches my eye and interests me, and it may start a story. So as I walk along a trail, I could find a rock. I mean, geology was my first science, and or a feather, and or a bug or a beetle or a lizard or mammal or a cloud. But as I walk along a trail and I find an object, I pick it up and I examine it and I look at it and questions arise. It's like, who dropped this feather? Where does it come from? You know, what what does it look like? How long is it? Does it have curvature? And does it belong here? Is it resident or is it migratory? And looking around me, I see the habitat that it could live in. I see the bushes and the trees and see what is surrounds that supports this ecosystem and this habitat. And so my interest is sparked immediately. And I'll tell you now, I'm easily distracted. I am, when I'm in nature, anything goes, anything could capture my attention. And this was a sketch that in my yard, from wandering around during the pandemic, I came across this caterpillar in a desert willow. And I lifted up and to the end of the twig and bent it down so I could see it better. And it took a swung at me. It was boxing. And me, being the big predator, dropped the twig, jumped back, and it was immediately a story in my mind. It was just a fascinating part of nature I'd never witnessed. So I did bother it for a little bit in pulling the twig down again, and it boxed again. And so I left it alone because I didn't want to disturb it, stress it, to keep it from eating and then carrying on with its life. But it was fascinating mechanics of where it started and where it ended up in a full U-turn. So my fascination is just sparked easily. Also, during the pandemic is when this book emerged, because people, students, colleagues have asked me to write a book for decades, and I never knew what I wanted to do. But my path, it solidified during the pandemic because we live in a beautiful, one of the most biodiverse places in the US. And everything, we have 2 acres here in Oaks and Manzanitas, everything right here in my yard could keep me busy for a long, long time. And so I got interested in insects, and a local entomologist friend gave me some specimens to take to my sketching and nature journaling classes. And so here they were sitting on my desk. And while I was feeling sorry for myself for the pandemic, I thought, well, that would be a great exercise to teach reflections and iridescence. So how would I paint them in order to teach this particular subject? And that's what started this sketchbook. These are nothing fancy, just in a great sketchbook. And this is how I record for my memory, how I try out, how I experiment. And in my workshops, I bring live animals into class. I do have a specialty in birds, but I've also teach at the conferences. I have wild animal drawing. We've brought alligators and lizards and armadillos, snapping turtle one time with brilliant eyes. The eyes of a snapping turtle are just amazing. And so what I do in class is begin teaching with, and how I learned was with gesture drawings. With a fine art background, I learned how to draw from life. And so this is a composite image. And up in here, you can kind of begin just finding shapes. And over here, this edge on where the peregrine's dark to light coloration ends. This is how I begin. Many people think that we, as artists and illustrators, kind of start at the upper left and paint, 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 and come to the bottom and presto bingo, we've got this finished piece. Well, some people can do that. I cannot. I've never been able to. I have to build. So my process is what I wanted to share with this book. And both beginning students and professionals have been more drawn to my sketchbooks than my portfolio, like at portfolio night at the Guild conference, because I would teach a class and bring animals to class, and they like to figure out, beginners like to figure out how to start. And the professionals are interested, like myself, when I look at other sketchbooks, I like to see how they solve issues, how they do their research. So this is kind of a composite of what the book has. And I might mention in the book that in my sketchbook, I call it the good, the bad, and the ugly. I do not do perfect sketchbooks, and I know people that are just fabulously create sketchbooks and journals. Sketchbooks for me are a place just to store mentally images. I will scribble. If I don't like something, instead of erasing it and fixing it, I move on and just do another one. This is my process because it is comfortable for me and it doesn't matter. My sketchbooks just don't matter. So when I get my sketches and my poses that I like, I start a much more detailed research process. And like the blue jay here, I start counting feathers. And I go to online resources, I go to museums, I do whatever I can to find the information. And there's Robert Pyle's book on that describes how many feathers are in the wing and the tail feathers per family. Super detailed. Is it Robert Pyle, or I may have made a mistake? Last name is Pyle. Forgive me. So I began to develop. There's also other resources for open wing studies, like with the Puget Sound Museum of Natural History, wing and tail, open wing studies. You can go in and zoom in on those feathers, and they, of course, give all of the data that one needs as far as measurements, male, female, dates it was collected, or it was a window kill. However, the demise of the bird, and it's a fabulous reference for artists and illustrators. And again, sometimes you find a feather and it's a mystery. So by measuring and studying, whether it's the part of the cranium that was found, you can reveal who was predator, who was prey. These things, I love to get into the weeds with the research, but I also love the spontaneity of drawing. My specialty in my interpretive work is to show behavior instead of just a field guide pose, and I've done a lot of field guides. They have a different purpose. But in interpreting an animal, to add a little bit of its behavior or its posture is more educational for people. And in the interpretive work I do in visitor centers or trails, parks, whatever, many of those visitors might not speak English, but a strong visual showing what that animal or bird or insect is doing or interacting in its habitat is meaningful information as an interpreter. Now, these birds, we had 4 young ravens fledging in the neighborhood, and 2 succumbed to our electric pole that happened to be right outside our property. And I brought them in, and it was devastating to me because ravens were they're some of my most cherished birds. But I felt this opportunity to look closely. And so I began sketching. There were two birds, labeled them bird 1 and bird 2, and began investigating because I'd never held a raven before, and even in a museum. And so my exploration went to also making this, which is a color map. Now, ravens are generally black and shiny as we see them, but what I discovered when I held one in the sun, that there wasn't iridescence, but there was a color sheen that came from particular feather tracks and from cerulean, ultramarine, and this olive color. And so I again made a study, an open wing study, not as a portrait of a raven, but for information for me and my brain in the future, should I ever do a raven, this could be of help to me. So this is part of my process, I guess. And excuse me, take a drink. COVID left me with a cough. When I get down to start painting, I will do sketches and sketches of birds like this. And then when I start to paint, I'm a watercolorist. And I did about a 9 by 12 inch practice study on the same paper that I work on the day before I was going to paint. And I love the texture of the old desiccated saguaro. It's like a landscape seen from an airplane. And I worked on the spattering and the salt and to try to get some cool, subtle textures in the background. And then the next day, when I decided I set up to do the big one, our humidity changed in Arizona, and the paint and the salt did not react anything like it did the day before. So we moved forward. And I did one. I didn't particularly like the way it was going, so I pulled out another sheet and started another painting. And I think that this is the first layer background. And I think I started, the final piece was with the lighter one because I know I could build on top of it in layers. And this is the final piece. I began a few years ago, and being an interpreter, it felt so comfortable that I include a plant. Well, there's the main subject, be it mammal or bird, a plant and an insect or arachnid, usually hidden somewhere. Excuse me. In not totally hidden, but indicated, because all of these elements, just like I walk on a trail, all of these elements are in the painting to choose from. So when I start this process and I come up with a story, it's not like a straight line. It's like I'm taking a trail to develop the image. But remember, I'm easily distracted. So I might find a host plant and a caterpillar or a bug or a lizard or, ooh, look, a rock, because the rocks, the terroir of the soil is also part of its environment. So I add an insect, a plant, and a mane to most all of my paintings, and I have for several decades now. And here we have the elf owl. He's roosting during the day, waiting to come out at night. This saguaro is still standing and makes some awfully cool cavities for all sorts of desert animals in the Sonoran Desert to harbor during the day from the sun. And then we work around through the light down here to a oh, COVID just blew my name. Tricolor, Hemaluca tricolor. There we go. And so it's such a beautifully camouflaged moth. So as I travel along these side paths, eventually they do emerge on a trail, and it gives me all sorts of information for my story. It's often not just a straight line to the subject. And so bringing mammals into class, we've had a wonderful variety. This was one of the most surprising to see in person. This is a ringtail. It's nocturnal. It's the state mammal of Arizona. And I've only seen 2 in the field at night in my life. But having this little female in the class at the Desert Museum, have been teaching about 15 years at the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum. And with their education department, they bring wild animals into the class, but they're educational animals. They are very calm around adults and screaming children in classrooms. But she was absolutely so graceful. I never expected it. The ringtail has a lot of nicknames that are kind of misnomer. It's called a ringtail cat. It's not a cat. It is in a genus by itself, and it is related to raccoons and coatis. But the grace of this little animal, and I just doing some weird sketches and making notes, this is to help my brain later, storing the information and sparking an interest. So where does this animal live? What environment? What direct habitat? Well, they're in the Huachuca Mountains that are behind me. And so they appear all over in the Sky Islands. And so in a little bit of variance of habitat, but I chose my own backyard for the particular choice of plants and insects and rocks. And so when I go out and do the research, We have some wonderful Ramsey Canyon Preserve has wonderful plants and pine trees. So I was going with pines, but I can't take a pine cone home with me, or I can't pick some of the leaves and take it with me. So in a sketchbook, I'll trace around the species and I'll measure the different types of little important bits. And also keep in mind that pines here hybridize tremendously. And so then later I'll work on the insect. Here's a blue-winged grasshopper that will, again, all these paths of interests will pull together to make a story. And this is the final piece using pinon pine. I drove to the Chiricahua Mountains to find a rock face that I wanted because it is within the same habitat. The ringtail's attention this pose is drawn to down here, the blue-winged grasshopper that's hiding here. So the story develops. Now, we have a personal family story involving the Eskimo curlew. And Tina Litvak invited me and some interns there at the Smithsonian to come and talk to have a tour. And the bird curator was wonderful to show us specimens. And she asked if there was any particular bird that we wanted to see. And I had to say Eskimo curlew. And I knew that was in their extremely rare, if not extinct, bird collection. Many museums will not even allow visitors in to see them. But this curator did. And this was the first time I've ever laid eyes on the curlew specimen. With the history in my family is that my husband, Trevor Ben, rediscovered what they thought at the time was this extinct bird on March 22nd, 1959 on Galveston Island, Texas. It was once the most abundant shorebird in North America, breeding in the upper Arctic of Canada and Alaska and migrating to Argentina in the Pampas areas down in there. I'll never get to draw this bird living because now it is thought to be extinct. So later, I went back and did research, went to the Smithsonian with permission and measured, took color sample studies in my sketchbook, and began to develop a piece that was to represent this bird in life. And the best way I found in dealing with rare and endangered bird is to study a very near relative. And the whimbrel is it's a common shorebird in the US. And so it's related, it is the same genus, but it's larger, bulkier. And so to trim it down, that was where my research led me. I could study the movement, the balance of the bird, the living whimbrel as it was walking, and try to translate that into the extinct bird. And there are a very few black and white and maybe one color slide taken by Dan Blights. The curlew, the rediscovery of the curlew at this point shocked the ornithological world. And a lot of people came to see it and make notes. They published and did all sorts of things about the sighting of this, hoping that there would still be an extant population. And one bird showed up between the next years to the 60s to 1962, and there were two birds, not in the same field. But my husband wrote for me in the book his insights into seeing this bird and what he noticed about it. And the last bird was seen in 1962, and it hasn't been seen in the contiguous United States ever since. So what I do to develop it, I work, like I mentioned with the blue jay, well, I didn't mention it, sorry. I work in layers on tracing paper. And you can see some of my layers here, 3 and 4. I like to build on tracing paper because if I'm working on an area like the bill and I'm trying to be extremely precise and yet something's not right about it, instead of erasing it and trying to go over and fix it, sometimes I find that I like the previous version better. All it needed was just a little tweak. So I use a very clear tracing paper and I build in layers. And so I make the bill smaller, slender, more truncated. And I began developing, there we go, details. And finally, I get into the nitty gritty, into the weeds from my measurements that I took at the Smithsonian, looking at the length of the primaries, the shape of the tertials. And finally, on layer number 7, I get the whole bird together, and then it's ready to put on the good paper. I'm very big on thumbnail sketches, no matter what I'm doing. And instead of working a value drawing and erasing, I'll do sketch after sketch after sketch. If it's a horrible composition, forget it. I'll just move on and do another one. I don't try to fix it because it's just my sketchbook. It's my working brain. And sometimes I will go back and say, that number 3 might work best of all. So fixing at this stage is not my priority. Fixing in this stage is my priority. And I do notan studies. I love working in the method of notan. And so here is the final piece that is in transparent watercolor on cold pressed paper. And this was my first piece that I did for it, for my husband. And I later reproduced the same image for an Artist for Conservation's submittal for a mural. They commissioned all their members to submit 4 different birds from the red list of endangered birds, and the Eskimo curlew was on that list. It's still not declared extinct yet. And so naturally I had to do it. So I redid it in gouache for that particular mural, and it is a fabulous installation of 375 8x8 pieces, all contributed by their members, which are international members. So with the book, in Princeton has been absolutely fabulous to work with. When I submitted my proposal, the Nature publisher contacted me by email within 18 hours saying that he would like to talk with me about the book. He said, now, Princeton doesn't do how-to books, but he recognized this isn't a how-to book. Because I combined science and art, which they are one of the most world-famous science publishers, it caught his eye, and I designed the whole book before I sent it out. But I had to produce the sequence of the process. I had to show it. I can't just write a paragraph about what I was going to do for the book. This book needed to show what I did and my process. And so I designed it. I did my grid and decided that the title was going to be a title for each spread. This is a 2-page spread. And the body text was going to be short and sweet, an introductory text. And I wanted it in a sans serif font. And then the fun part for me was I wanted the annotations, the handwritten annotations, to be the meat of the book. It did describe what I thought interesting about this body part, why this animal has this interesting relationship to this plant. Because I've worked a lot with pollinators. I've worked a lot with forest ecosystems and aquatic insects in my interpretive life. And so the annotations, my notes are my brain processing what I thought was interesting along this process, what I needed to pay attention to. So in order for me to add annotations in, when I'm working with naturalist notebook style and interpretation, I'll handwrite out the caption and I'll scan it and I'll put it in the design Illustrator program. But on this piece, I was editing as I was going. So I decided that in order to do this was that I needed a handwritten font. So I created my own font. And that way I could edit and move it around, get it to fit. And so I found, I tried myfonts.com, but I wound up with Calligrapher. And I did it several times, and they give you a blank grid. But they also have the ability to edit font details, the size, the spacing. And that was brilliant because it's hard to get all of that exactly right when you're doing it letter at a time. At least it was for me. And so if I had known that in the front part of the book, they list the font that I used, I would have named it something a whole lot cooler than L.M. Feltner hand font test number 6. So this is, yeah, it would have just been cooler. But nonetheless, when the British graphic designer put it together, he said he understood that I wanted handwritten and then the sans serif, and so and the title font. And so he worked to help me trim those up, make it better for the publication. The night he knew better than I did. And so he said, well, let's try out a couple of hand fonts. And none of them really quite worked. They were bulky, or the kerning was too much, or just a little weird. And so he said, well, when you made your font, was it OTC, open type? And I said, yes, it was. And he says, let's use that. So even with the annotations are my own personal contribution in the annotations that I write. So with the development of this book has been a real joy. It started with the pandemic when everybody's plans crashed, and I began stepping outside my door and looking closer at what I had right here in front of me where I live, because I knew my international travel was, you know, deleted. And so here I was enjoying the great world in which I live. So in to celebrate curiosity is what I know we have in us, all of us. And I wanted to share just the curious things that we come across and how valuable they can be to us. So as today and to the 15th, I have books on hand here, and I would like to share it with a GNSI discount. And I have just received so many people enjoying this book, from 6-year-olds, 14-year-olds, people who are beginning to paint, professionals, and people who have never painted in their life. They just enjoy. One of the coolest compliments, or one of the most interesting and coolest compliments I ever received, was that someone who knew nothing about artwork. We were down in the San Pedro house looking through the book, and he said, I never knew it took so much work. And so it's an insight into how I do it. And there are so many fabulous how-to books out there that I did not want to go in that direction. And I didn't want to do a coffee table book, because there's fabulous ones out there. But the core of my working career really isn't as suitable for a coffee table book. I just didn't want to do that. But what people want to know about is my process. And the Guild has had a hand in that. For the professionals that come to the conference and go to portfolio night, and we would set up, I would have my portfolio, and then I'd lay out my sketchbooks, because I was teaching a workshop and I wanted them to see what we were doing. Nobody looked at my portfolio. They wanted to flip through the sketchbook. And when I'm in a rut, I go to my favorite British painters, drawers that publish their sketchbooks. And I've got tons of inspiration out there that I go, and I like to pore over their sketchbooks, because it is the spontaneity. It's like looking through the artist's eyes at what they're seeing and what they're doing and what they're thinking. And my beginning classes, the students want to just know, how on earth do you begin? So this concept of showing my process has arrived here. I'm very pleased to offer it to you. And to purchase it, I would just like for you to send me an email, and I will contact you with the distinct information that I need, and then give you the cost of whatever shipping and the sales tax for Arizona residents. That's all. But now I would like to turn it back over to Mark, because I would really love to hear questions that you may have. You ask the best questions. And so thank you very much, Mark. I'm going to stop the share. Is that what I do?
That is what you do.
Bingo. There we go. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. I did put in the chat for people your link, Linda, to your email.
Thank
Also,
you.
that the book is until December 15th and the title of the book. So that is a wonderful offer and it's so great. I wanted to ask you before we let some people have a conversation with us, I wanted to ask you one question that I really like to ask both artists and scientists because it's a question that gets at why we stay motivated to do what we're doing. So it can be really intricate, the work you do, and it can be really fatiguing as well. And it's the same way that somebody's doing science research can be the same way. What is it that's your special thing that keeps you motivated to just keep going and producing and doing that?
I think I developed a love, fascination, and thus later a love of nature um, from a small child. My parents were both worked. They had 2 weeks vacation a year. And so we would drive from East Texas nonstop to Denver. And then from there, they took me to nearly all of the national parks in the West. And I just experienced more than the East Texas town I lived in. I saw mountains and we would stop for beaver and moose and the Yellowstone and the bears and the big tall trees in California. There was an awe attached with nature. And I was destined to be a high school art teacher. And as I became interested in birding, it brought home everything that I ever, really fascinated me. And that was art and nature. So why didn't I paint nature? And that light bulb moment has been with me forever. So by exposure to the area that I love, or whatever the subject is, I mean, I went back and took biology and ornithology and those because of just the interest. But the inspiration is it's just going out, breathing, and seeing what's around. And then and then it just sparks my curiosity. And then I'm happy to dig in and find out all the details. And it is tedious. I found a Mayline drafting table so I can stand, I can sit. I found good chairs to work in so I'm not as fatigued because I would put in long hours. And I will have to say that dark chocolate probably had a lot to do with it too.
I think that's great. Do we have any questions? Somebody want to unmute themselves? Let me unspotlight you for here. Um, Anybody have a question they'd like to ask her directly?
I
Hi,
um
Nancy
can
or
you hear
Margaret.
me?
Go ahead, Margaret.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm not on video because I'm
Oh, that's fine.
anyway, no, I loved what Linda, this was great. It was fabulous. I had a question. I love the notion, the technique that you were ex describing where you don't erase your work on the tracing paper, that you just put another layer over and like redraw it in case you like the one underneath better. I mean, I love that notion because I'm always scrubbing something out. Um, you said you used very clear tracing paper. What brand do you use?
I use a Canson.
Canson.
Yeah, I found that to be, let me make sure what kind it is. I've got some right here. Yes, it's a Canson tracing. Whoops. And it to me is the clearest.
Uh,
I tried some from Blick and some other companies, but no, it's just called Canson tracing.
okay, great. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Great. Nancy, Art, you have your hand up?
Yes, I was just wondering, did you say that you used Illustrator to create your book, or did you use InDesign?
I used Photoshop to create the book. I use InDesign, I use them all in my interpretive work. But since there's over 600 images in the book, it's 287 pages. And I would scan them here and I would arrange them. I'd need to cut and paste, maybe fade out something and arrange them. And I could do that much easier in Photoshop. And I also did the text. And it was so easy for the publisher who lays out in Illustrator, because they just took a flat PDF and they put it in Illustrator and used it as a template. And I sent them all of the images at the specifications they needed, because I was really used to doing that. And I had them all labeled according to what page and everything. And they just went bloop, 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 and sized them or did them and polished what they were doing. And then they laid in the text blocks perfectly. So that worked out well for them. And they were very happy that I was able and had the skills to do it, to make their lives a lot easier. And then I got what I wanted. So
Thank you. It's a beautiful book.
thank you. Thank you.
Is it Jenya Hauser?
Yes, it's Jenya.
Oh, Jenya. Okay, go ahead.
Hi. Thank you for this talk. It was amazing. My question is, how do you, what part does photography play in making your illustrations? Do you ever rely on photographic images? Do you take photographs of the specimens, and or do you mostly prefer to draw from life?
It's a good question. I will use any tool in my power to give me information. I love photography, and I think photographs are a great reference. But being, I think, in my fine art background and love to draw, and being a birder and an observer, I get a feel for the animal, and I remember it better if I draw it. I also use roadkill. I use museum specimens. I am the repository for all of the neighborhood people down here who have window kills, and I keep them in my freezer out here in the studio, and they are wrapped up, frozen, and they go to the Puget Sound Natural History Museum. And I take them up there. I used to take them up there once or twice a year to the curator, the main curator there, the director. And I do have permission to keep and transport them. And in my luggage, I put them in checked luggage. I get a nonstop flight from Tucson to Seattle. He picks me up, and I pack them in little ice packs all around, and I wrap them in double garbage bags and seal them up with the letter on top that says I am authorized to transport these specimens or these birds. And they could be mammals, there's snakes, sometimes there's gophers, anything that comes across. And I get there in 2 hours and we're done. And so I never want to have them have a problem with me transporting birds, because they probably looks really weird in the X-ray. But so with those, the whole combination, one of the things I really am enjoying in studying birds is the Macaulay Library, the video about birds. When I want to study a bird that I've never seen, or even one that I just need a memory refresher on, still photographs are problematic, as everyone knows. It's a thousandth of a second, and it can often catch a specimen, a wolf walking, a tiger walking, or a bird in an awkward pose. So watching a video is far more information than just simply one photo. And if I'm looking online and I find information, say one part of a bird wing, and I really want it altered, I don't want quite that pose, the photographers that put photos online, they pick the photos, they pick the pose. And I'm often looking for something different. I said the bat coming at you rather than the bat sideways feeding on the flower. And so they are the one that does the composition. So I need more information than that. And what I tell my students about working from a single photo is that if you can get as much research to support that single pose, that's fine. But it's like if you had a giant, fabulous commission to paint the portrait of the Queen, you wouldn't want to do it from her driver's license photo. It is problematic to use one reference. So I would just suggest anything and everything. And photographic references are very valid. So that's a good question. Thanks.
Great. I had another question in the chat, which is, I'm interested to know what published artists' sketchbooks you use.
Ooh. Well, let's see. There is Keith Brocky. These are amazingly Brits. And come on, COVID brain, get some work done. Michael Warren, Charles Tunnicliffe, and Americans, Jacques, Francis Lee Jacques. But I don't know, I'm very fond of the British bird painters and animal painters. So those are a lot of the British books, a lot of books that actually show their sketchbook. Tunnicliffe did a lot of different kind of illustrations for magazines and then color pieces as well. And it is just like looking through their eyes to see what they did. It's so spontaneous. And then with many artists like that, they do a full work. And like myself, you know, it's so elaborate or so finely created that I really like the spontaneity of sketches. I always have. So
Yeah. So when you're looking at those, Linda, you know, this extends it further. You're looking at these sketches, and I can already see what's probably happening for you. You're seeing different situations, different poses, different ways they tried to represent something in the feather or the wing. And I can imagine it's just inspirational for you.
it is. It really is, because I get in a rut just like everybody else and get burnt out. And yeah, I just drink it in.
That's just great. Another question that that's on my mind too. Where can we take a workshop with you?
um, I used to do, prior COVID, I used to do a number of workshops with Guild Chapter, the Northeast. I'm giving one in March in Raleigh, North Carolina with the North Carolina chapters. And I believe it's open to all GNSI members. It's a 3-day bird drawing workshop, and we'll have live birds in class. I teach at the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum, and I teach 3-day weekend workshops, once in the fall and once in the spring. And that's largely where I've taught in Seattle at the Guild chapter up there. And but at every conference, I at least teach a 3-hour class of bringing any birds or animals into the classroom. Excuse me.
No, you're fine.
But yeah,
Do
check
you
out
offer,
Raleigh when they advertise.
do you offer any virtual ones at all, Linda, or all in person?
So far, they're all in person. During COVID, when the technology was blooming for virtual teachers, I decided not to go that route at that time. I started working on the book. I started changing a life path, because what I had planned was not never going to happen. And so, and then I just started rolling on the book and pulling it together. And I didn't realize that I had acres, it seems like acres, all of my developmental drawings that go back into a lot of projects. Because if I did research on, I don't know, say aquatic insects, and I may later do another trail that deals with aquatic insects, I would keep those drawings in research. And so I just kept filing cabinet, 7 filing cabinets, and a whole archive room back in there that I just pulled everything out. And when I found a complete set of developmental drawings, and then I had the final piece, well, that kept me going in the development of the book. And it, I don't know, it was about 2 years that it took me of the pandemic. So teaching virtually is still on the possible list, but right now I'm just we've just, the book's come out, and I'm just now getting settled back into an art routine.
Great.
But I love teaching.
That's wonderful. Anybody with any other comments or questions?
I know you have great questions out there.
They do. Anybody? Just unmute yourself and go ahead.
So I'll ask a question about your process with watercolor and the tracing paper. So you do all your drawings and you come up with the Canson tracing paper for your final drawing.
Mhm.
Now you're going to transfer that to watercolor paper, correct?
Yes.
Do you project it? Do you trace it? How does that happen so magically?
It, I do it the old-fashioned way. I'll get the final piece and I will scan it. And then I will enlarge it on the computer or reduce it to the size that I want to paint it, because I'm usually never doing the development. I do the development big enough for me to get to the detail, even though it may be small. And I print it out on laser bond paper. And then I put it down and use a Sorol, a graphite carbon paper, and tape it down, and then use a very fine point ballpoint pen that no longer has ink, but and trace the image, the landmarks on the image. And I don't project it anymore. I do have a projector, but I discovered that if I spend 6 weeks researching a bird, usually it's about 3 to 4, but sometimes they're more. Then projecting it, sometimes is it called keystoning?
Keystone.
Any distortion of the projection defeats what I've just tried to do on paper. And so I gave it up. And because I have a setup here and then I put it up horizontal, this Mayline table goes up horizontally, and it took so long, and I just thought it's too problematic. So that I do it the old-fashioned way and laser print it and put it down, tape it down, and then use the Sorol carbon paper.
Thank you.
You know, thanks for asking a question, Nancy. Some of you probably have watched it. I watched only the first episode so far of the public television in the United States of the Leonardo da Vinci
Yes.
thing. But, you know, the technique you're talking about is one that not only he used, but many others, of that pushing through with something to create
Yep.
the tracing. So, you know, didn't have the advantage of being able to project it. Plus, it would distort it. Also, you know, I think your workshop would be hard to do virtually. That doesn't mean impossible, but there is a lot to the depth of the actual thing in 3D. I mean, that you're holding. One thing being able to draw from an image, but what you're saying is, you know, shadow and light and those things really do come through more in the actual object.
Yes. And that's pretty key to doing it. And to have, I mean, you can work from videos and to understand shape in a moving animal, because it's pretty intimidating for some folks to draw from a moving animal. And my botanical artist friends used to tease me about that. Hey, this bird is moving. Well, I took a workshop with Marge Leggett, and we had flowers in front of us. I said, Marge, it's moving. It was unfolding as we studied it. And so it's like, you can't tell me that you're not going to draw birds because they move. And the busiest animal I've ever had in class was a boxed turtle. And it was in a large container, and it just trucked from one side to the other, to the other, to the other. And yeah, you think tortoises, turtles are just going to sit there and pose for you, but it's challenging. But I think, you know, there's an approach. I think there's a little fear factor, and there's an approach to getting over that, and just getting in and scribbling and looking for shapes that are moving. And I always like to ask my students to bring like 11 by 14 sketchbooks, not a small one, because when sketching live, it will have, say, an owl on a fist, and start sketching one, and then he moves his head. well, just start over and start another drawing with it this way. And he moves back, work on this one. He moves back, work on that one. It's little tricks of the trade that allow you to build for success. And that might be able to be managed, some part of it, virtually.
Yeah. Linda, I think, what you were just talking about is really important for everybody. And that is, and you said that earlier on, but your background in gesture drawings, which I had the same art, teaching as well, it makes you be able to go quickly on your feet. So if you do have something, which I'm thinking it's funny that it's a box turtle that was the most challenging, but it is this idea that you are trying to capture at any moment. And that's where the challenge comes in, I think, but also you have the solution because the gesture drawing training that you had. And so am I right on that? Does that really helping you?
Oh, it's always helped. But the thing about drawing live is you're training your eye and brain and hand coordination. That's all it is. You're focusing and you're training those three to work together. And that just takes skill. It's nothing that, you're just landed with. It is something that you practice at. I mean, whether you have a dog or a cat, or the neighbor has chickens or a horse, if you study a dog, you can do a wolf. If you have a cat, then you can draw a tiger. So it's observation skills for any of us are key. My first illustration job was at the Houston Zoo. And I learned a lot about the technical aspect of typesetting, because we type it out on this long little strip and we paste it up and then we reproduced it. And so I brought my drawing skills and learned with my graphic skills and applied it to the detail that I love with illustration. And that was a long time ago. But I moved from that to Seattle. I worked for an architect firm that designed zoos, and I was designing graphics for them a little bit, but then they decided that they didn't want to add that to their package. So I went out on my own and start putting in bids on jobs. And then I worked in the natural parks and Forest Service, BLM. They really had fabulous old growth forest projects, Mount St. Helens projects, alpine meadows, aquatic insects, salmon stream restoration. All of those things just fed right into what I wanted to do with showing people a little bit about what animals do. So that's a path.
It's really wonderful. Anybody else with any comment or question?
Yeah.
All right. Linda, thank you so much for sharing with us.
You're very welcome.
It's been wonderful for me, really educational to see from different perspectives. You were able to cover not only your perspective as an artist, but as a naturalist, but also the process of how you get, getting a book and how you created that. And I can only imagine that many illustrations. That drives any publisher crazy these days. So it's really been wonderful to have you with us. I wanted to let everybody know that this is a beginning of a series that we'd like to do with US GNSI members, where we try to highlight those of you that have a skill like Linda does in different ways so that we can have a conversation together and learn from one another. And we'll be doing that more as the months come on in the future. So it makes sense, if you're not already a member, to become a member by going to gnsi.org and joining us or renewing your membership. And we'll make this available once people that are volunteers that are going to take this video and make it available to those of you that are online, as well as others that were not able to attend. So you'll be able to refer it to others. And again, Linda, I cannot thank you enough on
You're very welcome.
GNSI
You're all
and
very
everything else.
Thank you.
And I'll bring us to a close. It's good to always be kind of good with our time so that we do these and then we know that we can spend time doing it again. So thanks again to all of you for coming and all of the people at GNSI that are behind the scenes that make all this happening, including Wendy Jackalow. So thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you all. And thank
Have a
you,
good, have a good rest of the week. Bye.
Bye-bye.